Thank you all for being here at a virtual event in the oldest bookstore in Los Angeles, 80 years of continuous service to our community. And this is an evening I've been looking forward to for bunches of reasons. First, because I'm a fan of Dan Shallman, one of the more prominent lawyers in Los Angeles and a person who every day in his life as a lawyer makes a difference. And his brother, John, who is a political Svengali of the first order, and as you will be hearing, somehow found time to write this really, really interesting book. If it were from a Spanish source, I would say a kind of a telenovela. From a Yiddish source, it strikes me as a likely miniseries. It is, for those of you who haven't had the chance to read it yet, a story that talks about families over 3 generations in 3 different settings. The principal part of it, of course, is the extraordinary grandfather who is a communist, who gets exiled to Siberia, who takes the Lusitania across the Atlantic to wind up in New York on his way to Chicago. They are extraordinary, just extraordinary stories, and it all starts because of certain political ideas, which I'm sure Dan and John will talk about. Then we get to meet John's family, or John Simon's family, in the real world. And then we get to be up close and personal to a consequential political campaign, which until I remembered exactly what it might have been, I was finding myself as anxious about the outcome of the political campaign as I was about whether Grandpa would make it out of Siberia. So what we would like to do tonight is maybe have 45 minutes of the brothers chatting, and then open it up for some questions. And I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation because we start off with a really interesting book. So let me turn it over to Dan as the interlocutor to see what he has to have his brother explain.
Thanks, Bert, and thank you to Chevaliers for hosting us tonight. And by the way, we'll try to wrap up so all of you can get a chance to see Trump's convention speech tonight. Actually, you know, we're happy to actually provide some good liberal counter programming for those of you who can't turn on the television. Like I can't right now. So thanks Bert, thanks to Chevaliers for hosting. I have to say my family misses our weekly pre-COVID walks over to Larchmont to the bookstore for books, and our dog especially misses the treats. He drags us down the street into the store. So the treats are a good investment, Bert. Gets people in the store for sure.
I hope we'll have that chance again to get people in the store. But
absolutely. But you should. You can still buy books from Chevaliers. You can go to the website. You can go to bookshop.org. Set up appointments to shop at the bookstore. Schedule curbside pickups. And one book you should definitely buy if you haven't already is the debut novel from my brother, John Shallman, called Return from Siberia. It's a great read. I just finished it. It just came out. And congratulations, John. I saw that it just entered the Wall Street Journal nonfiction bestseller list this week at number 9, which is pretty incredible. I know we have a big family, but I think even our family can't buy that many books. So it looks like you're off to a great start. So I want to talk a little bit. I'd like to open it up to John for a second to give us a little bit of just background about yourself, about our family, where we came from. The book is about journeys in many ways, your journey and our grandfather's journey. Why don't you start out by telling us about your journey from Rock Island, Illinois to Los Angeles, California?
Sure. Dan, thank you. Bert, Kelsey, is it Chevalier, or is it?
Chevaliers like Maurice.
I really wanted to say Chevalier. I wanted to feel like a musketeer and say that. And I want to thank you guys so much for hosting this. This is my first. I sort of always imagined romantically writing a book and sitting amongst people, all these intellectuals, and having a pen and being able to sign. And so we're in a different time, but given the circumstances, I couldn't be more delighted to participate in this. And thank you for allowing me to do this. I'll start there. In terms of the question, in the book, I talk a little bit about myself, which is growing up in a small town, Rock Island, Illinois, 2.5, 3 hours west of Chicago. Small sort of industrial to farming town. It was a good place to grow up. And so my political activism really started there. It started when I became a student school board member on the Rock Island School District. And the very first meeting when I was 16 years old, they were voting basically to cut and fire teachers and cut extracurricular programs, cut art and music, sports, everything. And I sat there as a student who, by the way, your job was to be seen and not heard. And I stood up and I said, what are you doing and why? And the explanation was, well, we're in a recession and you may not know this, but we don't have any money, and little kid, be quiet. And I said, well, wait a second. I did a little homework. Why don't we raise money? Why don't we pay for a good education for your children? And let's, you guys had a good chance at an education. We deserve a good chance at an education. And so I rallied them to put a ballot measure that would raise property tax by just a little bit. And we organized a campaign, and we got that campaign going, door to door, canvassing, organizing all the school campuses, and we won. And it shocked everybody in our town of 40,000 people. And I was just delighted with myself on some level. I said, look what I did. I'm 16. That was amazing. And I felt so empowered by that. And it didn't really hit me until we had this big celebration in the school auditorium, high school auditorium, and a teacher came over to me, and she said, she held me on the shoulders. She was probably 28 years old, gave me a hug, and she said, thank you. And I pulled away, and she had literally tears strolling down her cheeks. And she said, my grandmother was a teacher here. My mother was a teacher here. All I wanted to be in my life was a teacher. And you helped save my job because I was one of the ones going to go. And in that moment, I had a lump in my throat. And I thought, wow, this had a very profound effect on someone's life. It wasn't just fun. It was meaningful in such a deep, visceral way to feel that sort of ability to help somebody. And so at that moment, it told me that no matter how old you are, no matter what you look like, no matter what the situation is, you can change the world in some small way to make things better. So that stayed with me for my life. And obviously, I went on to college. I went to the University of Iowa. I went there to, maybe be a writer, maybe do whatever. And suddenly a presidential campaign came through, and this guy by the name of Alan Cranston, those of you who may remember in California, a U.S. Senator, was running for president of the United States on a platform of jobs and peace. And I thought, those are two things I can get behind. I'm gonna work for Alan Cranston. So I did. His campaign began and ended in Iowa, but it was a great experience, and it brought me to California because I helped work for his Senate re-election campaign. From there, married, beautiful, lovely wife. You'll learn a little bit about my family in this book. If you indulge me, I'll say I have 4 beautiful children. They live here in Los Angeles. They are amazing. And I think a big part of this book was really for them, as this book is about family, if not anything else, and the intergenerational connection that we have, and just this knowledge that we aren't, who we are is not determined by our DNA. And no matter how many people selling you 23andMe and Ancestry.com to deposit a little saliva in a test tube and send it off to some white coats, it'll come back and it'll tell you some really interesting things. But it isn't fundamentally who you are. You are the stories. You are who your parents' experiences, your grandparents' experiences, those triumphs, those tragedies, the triumphs in getting to America, and why you came and where you came from and what that did to you, and that's what was communicated to me, and this is how I was figuring out who I was by writing this book. So that's a little bit about me.
So John, you talked about your four beautiful children, and they are indeed beautiful kids. You did not mention your four beautiful siblings, however. And we all obviously grew up in Rock Island, and we had a very strong a presence from our grandmother Rose, who lived with us for half of the year every year. And you know, I always remember growing up, there was always this book. We never knew our grandfather Joe, her husband, and our mom's father. We'd always heard about him. And then there was this book. It was this little black book, and it was in Yiddish. And it had these incredible pictures in it, one of which showed him laying in a hospital bed, having been shot. And apparently from the stories were that he was shot trying to escape from prison. But none of us could read Yiddish. And we never, and it sat there. We'd heard stories about Grandpa Joe. We knew the book was called Exiled in Siberia. And maybe you can tell us about how Exiled in Siberia became Return to Siberia, or Return from Siberia.
Return from.
Yeah.
So Dan and I were very fortunate to have our grandma Rose, but we didn't have anyone else in terms of grandparents. And you know, we're not alone. A lot of people are not fortunate to be able to grow up with four grandparents. And we didn't know Grandpa Joe. We didn't know either grandparents from our dad's side. But I spent a lot of time. I found a cassette tape of me interviewing my grandma Rose when I was 18 years old about her and her life growing up, and about Grandpa Joe and the experiences, and learning about Clarence Darrow and the mentorship that he provided Grandpa Joe. But for the most part, it was a bit of a mystery. And I was driving in Amherst, California, Amherst, Massachusetts, taking my daughter to school, and there just, you know, was the Yiddish Book Museum. And I thought, you know, I've got to get this translated. Who has the opportunity to hear the words of their ancestors? And so this was an opportunity. So we went in, and my daughter helped steward the translation of this. And it came one chapter at a time over a kind of a long period of time. So Bert, you said something episodic. It was sort of episodic for us to just hear a new chapter of my grandfather's story. And it was riveting. It was just bleak and horrible, and yet so gritty and real. And then you start discovering where he went, and just understanding that he was 14, 15 years old when he was first in jail, put in jail. And actually was shot, not escaping from jail. He was shot basically diverting from his family so they would not be captured and they could escape. And what was really fascinating about his story was how he took the fall. He was constantly taking the fall. He was not the revolutionary in the family at 15 years old. It was his older sister, which I had no idea. I didn't even know he had an older sister. So a young woman was the revolutionary of the family. That was mind-blowing. His older brother, Max, who was also a revolutionary, who was also a breadwinner for the family. They were very poor in Pinsk, what is now Belarus. And when the authorities came and said, who did this pamphlet, this revolutionary pamphlet came from? My 15-year-old grandfather said it was mine. And the reason he did that was because he knew that if Max was taken away, the only guy who could help bring money and food to the table would have been gone. So he took the fall. And I say all of this because the story, as I learned going through, was so inspiring. We always think about speaking through generations and looking to the sky and say, tell me what to do. What am I to do? And we didn't have a grandfather. So having this book was an amazing window into his life, into what it was like to be, the grandson of a revolutionary. And being a political consultant, I found it mind-blowing because, you don't know that your politics has DNA in it at all. But we always wondered, where did this come from? And it turns out a lot of it came from my grandfather, Joseph Rako.
So tell us about taking this from, reading these chapters, which I read, and you're exactly right. The original text is, even in this sort of translation from Yiddish, riveting in its reality. I mean, he just really told us what happened, just the brutal, harsh facts of reality in Siberia, his reality growing up, and this constant danger that he was in, and it's incredible to read and gripping. And I'm wondering sort of what led to, and if you could tell us about the concept for the book itself and how you wove it in, the original text and his original narrative.
Yeah, so I was at dinner and I was talking to people about this book, and you can't help but sort of, want to tell and share this story. I got this book from my grandfather translated, and I can't believe what's going on in this story. It's amazing. So I was talking to somebody at dinner, and he's a writer, and he said, here's a thought. You have a really interesting life. I'm very fascinated by politics. I'm very fascinated by political campaigns and you running campaigns and the interworking of what's going on. And here you have this great book that you finally sort of discovered and have translated, and you should meld them together. You should sort of tell this story about how the impact this is having on you, because just watching you and hearing you, it's having an impact on you. And so that's sort of what happened is I started writing this as a, chapter by chapter about the impact this book was having on my life and the decisions we were making, not just my life, but the family's life, and incorporating the political campaign in this, but also subplots relating to each of my family members and the impact, learning about a great grandfather and their life and his life experiences and how that impacts you and your decision making. When you can reflect on the fact that someone in your bloodline did some pretty remarkable things, that you might have a little of that in you. You might have some little bit of, that courage. If he at 15 could do what he did, be thrown, extracted from his family, 15 years old, sent to Siberia, which, by the way, when you read his book and you see each city, you can literally Google map this and follow the trail across Siberia. It is super long. Okay, this is 1903. It's not 2003. You can't jump in a plane. This is a slow, harsh drive across and farther and farther, mile after mile away from your family that you may never see again. And thinking about that, when you face challenges in your life, they may seem mundane by comparison. They probably are. But if he can do that, I can do what I'm about to do. I can make this, I can have my bar mitzvah, or I can, whatever the issues are in the book, I can conquer it. And in my case, it was a political campaign, and the impact that the decisions he was making during the course of his life would have to inspire me in decisions to help win a campaign, an important campaign for a candidate.
So John, let's talk a little bit about the process in the book, and then we'll talk a little bit more substance and the narrative. So the book, first of all, how long did it take you?
Off and on, political campaigns, it's kind of every other cycle. So in off years, you're able to spend a little time doing something other than the 24/7 grind of running political campaigns. So in my odd years, I was able to kind of piece this together. And last year, 2019, I was able to spend a considerable amount of time to really put the book together. And it really started with a treatment. And then it went to a treatment of each chapter and kind of laying them side by side and being able to weave this kind of very different way to tell a story to put together. And most books you kind of have, it's linear and you kind of follow it through and there's flashbacks, but this was really kind of strictly trying to make sure that I didn't spend too much time in one era and leave people hanging so they find out, wait a minute, what happened back to Joseph and his escape from jail. So I wanted to kind of keep it paced. It started very long. It started as about an 85,000 word book. And through the help of editor, publisher, and others, there were rabbit holes I was following that weren't necessary. So we kind of cleaned it up and tightened it up. And it's now a book that you could probably read over a weekend, I think, if you hopefully don't put it down. But that's really the process. It was just lots of notes and lots of research. I didn't talk about the research, but the research is really important because I love historical fiction, and I love when people paint the picture of going back in something that's sort of cinematic. So I was trying to use words to paint pictures of the time. I wanted to have people feel like they were transported into his eyes and seeing the world from his eyes as he floated across the New York Harbor into Ellis Island. I wanted people to feel what that was like and see what it was like to go to the Lower East Side and try to find a Jewish family among a million. What would that be like, finding a needle in a haystack, and little breadcrumbs to kind of lead the way ultimately to finding his family. And that was sort of I thought the really important theme here was, I was finding my own family. I was finding out about my grandfather, and the story really is him trying to find his family and what family is all about. And so, his ability to find his way to Chicago without iPhones and GPS systems, but to go from the farthest reaches of Siberia, north of Mongolia, all the way to Chicago, Illinois, and be able to find his family is actually an extraordinary adventure.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I noticed in reading the book is that, you go from your story, present day, roughly, and then the next chapter will be Yosef's story, Grandpa Joe's story. And his is, essentially like his book, told in the first person. That's his story told, and he's the narrator. Your story is you've got an external narrator. And I'm wondering how you decided to do it that way. It actually makes for, in some ways, it's nice to have the narrator change. It makes the book move fast. It has a nice pace to it. But I'm wondering how you decided to do it that way.
I mean, it started as being confusing to have two first-person narratives, one 100 years, forward and one 100 years back. To me, as I was reading it, it was confusing to me. And I thought, I don't know much about creative nonfiction, but it seemed like the way to go into this was to create more of a nonfiction novel and write in third person my experiences and write in first person to be true to how he wrote his book in first person. So it made it easier to travel through the book by in separating it. Like literally, the publisher created a slightly different font so that everyone knew where they were, right? It was important for me to make sure that people weren't getting confused, that it could really move easily. The transitions were easy to move through the book from past to present because there were a lot of subplots. And I didn't want it to become too twisted and too convoluted in the present day. And so that it just made sense to write it in third person. And frankly, it was easier on some level because, you know, when you write a nonfiction as a working political consultant, you have to be really careful. And Bert will know you can't write a book, Bert, about your clients right now because you've got confidentiality issues. So you've got to try to move things around a little bit to make it work and not violate any client's confidence, but also make it a really interesting book. So the third person, first person thing was really a style that just worked in terms of confusion, I think, clearing up confusion.
Mm-hmm. So John, I want to talk about the campaign that's really at the heart of your story in a second, but I want to spend a few more minutes talking about Grandpa Joe's story because there's some truly just incredible events that happened. And one of the things that struck me when reading his original text and then reading yours, and it comes out even more, is when you think about Siberia, you think about the Gulag and sort of prison. And this is exile is not prison. When you read this book, you see that you really do see the difference. And in some ways, exile seems almost scarier and more bewildering, especially to somebody who was, 16, 17 years old at the time. Can you tell us about that and what your experience was in doing the research on that?
I will. And let me answer the question that I forgot to answer, which was, what does return from Siberia mean? Because Joseph doesn't, in fact, start in America and returns from Siberia. It's a little metaphorical in the sense he was exiled too. And I was, his grandson was traveling to Siberia through his story. And I was returning to my family and my present day to use those stories and the experiences of Siberia to impact my decisions and life of the people I love and the people around me. So that was what Return from Siberia was. It was really my return from Siberia back here. Remind me your question, I'm sorry.
Prison versus exile.
So here was the thing, in Siberia, if you have some sense, if you could Google the map and just take a look at what Belarus is. And Belarus is almost Europe. I mean, it's this far eastern, western portion of Asia. And you look at Siberia, where he ended up. He was literally on the other side of an enormous continent. You didn't have to put someone in jail there. Now, ultimately, Stalin created the Gulag system, and if you read any of Solzhenitsyn and any of that kind of, those stories, that's really bad stuff, right? That's going far away, and that's hard work prison. What they did back then is they didn't do, under the Romanovs, under the Tsar Nicholas, he didn't do public executions, and they didn't, take loved ones, the revolutionaries, and kill them. They sent them to Siberia. Really out of fear that there would be more revolution, that it would inspire the masses to come up and get him if they were doing that sort of thing. So when you go to Siberia, you go to and essentially live with indigenous people, the Chaldeans. You're living there, you're working, you're paying a small rubles to be able to stay in villages, and you work. It's a work village in Siberia that you are put at. Some people did escape. Stalin was able to escape multiple times. And ultimately he made the decision that, you know what, someday I'm going to come back here and build some really horrible places that I can take my enemies and send. But regardless, escaping was pretty much an impossibility, because where do you go? You really have to have transportation. And this was not an easy thing to come by back in those days.
So John Joseph eventually makes it, as Bert mentioned earlier, across the Atlantic in a harrowing journey. makes it to New York trying to find his family. When he was in exile, the family left. They got out of Pinsk. They came to the United States.
Yeah.
He has no idea where, just that they came to the United States. And he is desperate after getting out of Siberia to find his family. He eventually makes it. Now the book, the original book, Joseph's book, doesn't take us to America, as I recall, right? So how did you? But you tell the story, and how did you pull together details? I know we had. There's lots of stories, but how did you pull this together as to what happened once he got here?
So this was the challenge, right? And so it was a lot of research to try to figure out where did he go? How did he do this? And through the course of a lot of interviews with our mom, a lot of, just coming across some of his own letters and the recordings of interviews I had with his wife, Rose, piecing together the story. So there was a lot of sleuth work and trying to fill out the story. And I think, hearing the stories about Clarence Darrow over and over again, that he was Grandpa's lawyer and friend. And so filling in those details was challenging. And probably the most challenging part of writing this book was, how do I take all the elements and piece this together into a story that's consistent with what happened, but also, helps move the story through.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, he was courting our grandmother, Rose, in 1918 in Chicago. Look it up in 1918. What was going on? There was a pandemic. It's called the Spanish flu. So here he was in 1918, a guy who had conquered pretty much everything at that point, been through Siberia, been through everything. He wasn't too afraid of some microscopic something or other that's going to kill him. But I thought that was particularly interesting given what we're going through here today. So it's piecing it together, Dan, and just trying to be able to do justice to his story, and certainly to our grandmother, and all of the stories about her brothers, which she shared with us. I wanted to bring out in this book.
Yeah, I want to ask about one of those stories, and not to give too many spoilers, but it's just a great one that we always heard growing up. But one thing that did not make it in the book, what's that?
You.
I didn't make it. No, I know. Not surprised. But there was always a story, because we always heard about his friendship with Clarence Darrow, and there was a story, again, I don't know if it's true, I don't know if it ended up in one of the earlier drafts, but that at one point our grandmother, who was tough as nails, Grandma Rose, and Joseph had irreconcilable differences and were going to get a divorce. And again, this story has probably built up over decades, and that our grandfather shows up for some sort of a divorce proceeding with Clarence Darrow as his lawyer. And this was prior to them having kids, I think. So Clarence Darrow holds the fate of the eventual Shallman family in his hands in this divorce proceeding. And eventually, of course, they reconcile due to at least I like to believe, the legal acumen of Clarence Darrow. But did you consider including that? Was that
No, that's a sequel, Dan. That's
okay. Sorry,
down the road. We got to the marriage, and that was kind of it. But no, that was true. And we used to joke that our grandmother was so tough that it required our grandfather to hire one of the world's greatest trial attorneys to represent him, so he would have a chance as hell in court. But no, the story of it was great to spend time with our mom, and what was really meaningful for me, because we lost our mom this year, and it was really hard. But obviously one of the blessings for me was to be able to spend the number of hours I got to spend with her as I was researching this book, and getting a sense not just of the story, not just the facts, but who he was as a person, his soul, his conscience, his true believing. She would tell stories of how, he would play, Russian music, and he loved music, and what a poet he was, and what a romantic he was, and how gentle he was. And one of the important things that my mom shared with me was that women in his life played a very important role. And so I wanted there to be very strong women in this book. I think, our mom is sort of in some ways a heroine of the story. As the daughter of a very strong mom, we talk in this book about Joseph's mother, who was I imagined a lot to be like our mom, just extremely generous and kind. There's aspects of the story of how she could not part with her son. And you can imagine how horrible it was to see her son go away to Siberia, not knowing her 15-year-old she'd ever see him again. And he not knowing if he'd ever see her again. So what does that mean? That separation, that very painful separation, which we experienced this year. But there are so many really, I think, very powerful, strong women in this that I feel really happy being someone who has two strong women daughters and a strong wife, that's represented in this book.
John, so let's segue to another strong female character in the book, Patty Alvarado.
Yeah.
And she is the candidate at the heart of the political story, modern day political story, the campaign that involves, it's really your autobiographical piece of the novel. Can you tell us about the inspiration? The campaign is familiar to me, but may not be to others. So maybe you can tell us about what inspired that campaign, that storyline, and particularly interested in your creation of the Ralph Trent character.
So as Dan knows, there's been a book I've been wanting to write forever, because there's so many great stories about Loretta Sanchez when she ran to unseat Bob Dornan in Orange County. And Orange County was, they used to say, the Orange Curtain. So if you're a Democrat, you don't have a prayer of winning. It was the center, literally the center of conservative Republican America. The Crystal Cathedral rose into the sky. It was a very strong social conservative place. And it was represented by Bob Dornan for 9 terms. And he made his name by being very much like Donald Trump, someone who fed red meat to his base. He was somebody who was unapologetically anti-gay, pro-gun, anti-choice, misogynistic. There was actually a book written about Bob Dornan, 150 pages. It was called Shut Up, and it starts with an F, and it's a slur to LGBTQ community. But that was the name of the book, and where it came from is a list of all the things he said in his career that were like the title or worse. And so he was by far one of the crazy right-wing wackos, sort of poster boy of right-wing wackoism back in the 80s and 90s. And so came along this upstart young Latina named Loretta Sanchez, who made a decision that she was going to challenge him. And I was sitting in my little home in Sherman Oaks, and I saw her, and I saw the possibility. I said, the demographics were right, that politics are shifting, and I'm going to go down there and I'm going to see if she'll let me run her campaign. And she did, because she didn't have any other offers of people. So we found each other, and it was an extraordinary experience. She was a wonderful candidate. We had, lots of ups and downs. When you run a race like that, it became a very national campaign. The notion that a woman, a Democrat, a Latina could win in Orange County, California, why, by God, if that happened, we could win anywhere. So that's what Patty Alvarado and Ralph Trent was based on. And those stories are very directly what happened in that campaign, with a few little things that are modified to protect Loretta and others. But it was an amazing campaign, which we ultimately won, that he challenged, and yet was thrown out of office. And so we were proud to be part of that. My brother Morty, came down. I think he referred to us as the three caballeros or something, Dornan, I don't remember, but he called us all sorts of names. It was just a funny experience to be part of that campaign and to have that win. So I found a book that I would finally write where I could bring some of that in. And it was really fun, but also I thought timely because of what's happening in America today, particularly with immigration. We talked about this, that was an issue in the mid 90s. Those of you who have been in California, Prop 187. Those issues of immigration were there then, they're here now. And given that we are all from somewhere, unless you're indigenous, we're all immigrants. And our grandfather showed the challenges you have, why you leave a country, why you come to a country, what you want from that country you come to, the American dream. And everyone, no matter where you came from, whether you're Latina, whether you're European or Asian, South American, you have the opportunity to come to America and experience the American dream. And what that means is different for everybody. So, being able to focus in on the Patty Alvarado campaign was an opportunity to bring in some of the immigrant story that at the same time was being experienced by our grandfather.
Can I interrupt to make a special request?
Please.
Because I'm afraid you won't get to it. I would love to hear discussion of the Persian boyfriend. I would love to hear about the rich, very rich brother. And then I'm going to call on you to read the moving paragraph about the arrival in Manhattan as a sort of closer. But I'd love to hear those three things because I enjoyed each of those pieces a lot.
Yeah. So thank you, Bert. So I don't want to give too much away in the book, but there are storylines surrounding my children in this book, and my oldest in a relationship with an Iranian who is not a citizen, but is at UCLA studying, and has a father who's a professor at UCLA, and the experience that they and many families from the Middle East experienced under Donald Trump, which is a Homeland Security, a very overzealous Homeland Security. Some of you may remember when I was working on this. This was when we had many protests at LAX. I don't know if many of you remember that. And so bringing in this notion of this Jewish woman, young woman, a Muslim, and amidst this backdrop of immigration was something I really wanted to bring out. And I thought it was important, and that story was an important story in the course of this book. In terms of the, what's number 2?
Brother Max.
Brother.
So Brother Max. So Brother Max, if you recall when I talked in the beginning of this, taking the fall, this courageous teenage boy who would do anything for his family, was remarkable. It just shows the power of family and the power of love, and was willing to give his life away for his brother, who was the revolutionary, but who dreamed. And their father was a builder, very small builder, built their house. And he dreamed of building skyscrapers. He dreamed of building, you know, he had only heard of places like New York and Chicago where they have these tall buildings. He said he wanted to be a part of that. He dreamt of that. And, but he was a revolutionary. And he was passing out literature, pamphlets, and Joseph was caught. And Joseph had to go to jail. And Max came to America. And what did Max do? Max became a capitalist. Max came to Chicago and decided the American dream is you got to make a living. You got to make a living. You work hard, you make a living, you get paid. And he built a business, and the business was very successful. And so when Joseph and Max meet in this book, and I don't want to give too much away, let's just say there was conflict, because one went to prison for 10 years and he didn't even know that much about socialism and the revolution until he got to prison, and he was taught what it meant and how important it was, and workers' rights. And he came and saw a lot of the challenges and problems he had just left right here in America with industrialists and terrible work conditions. And sure enough, his brother was part of that problem. I will say, having had lots of conversations with our mother about this, that they were estranged, and you can understand why. His brother sold out, and he stayed true and became a union organizer, and they really were at odds. They found a way to make amends on some level, but it was a very important tension in this book, and one that's manifest today with the Democratic Party. You see the middle and the left debating about socialism, democratic socialism, and capitalism, and trying to find a middle somewhere. And it's a challenge because it's something that's been around for a long time. What's the third, Bert? I'm sorry.
Well, I wanted to sort of end your talk on the hopeful note. Paragraph, chapter 19, The Arrival. If you could read that. I found it soaring. I'm a big sucker for soaring, cinematic kinds of presentations. Having gone into that harbor myself many, many times, I was really quite moved by it. I wonder if you could
just start from the beginning.
Yeah, the first line through that first paragraph, I think.
Sure. The chapter 19 is Land of the Free. When I finally saw her, the feeling was overwhelming. She was taller than I expected. Her expression resolute, stoic, and unwavering. She appeared to be staring directly at me. Of that, I had no doubt. But I was hardly alone in my certainty. Indeed, a collective roar rose across all 6 decks of the immense steamship as it lumbered into New York Harbor, its great horns bellowing as if exhaling a celebratory sigh, while thousands of immigrants ran to the ship's rails to get a good look at the magnificent colossus that greeted us. Each one of these hopeful souls felt, as I did, that Lady Liberty was here to welcome us individually and personally, like a long-lost mother. The feeling made up for all the suffering we'd endured to make it here. The transatlantic, cut me off whenever you want.
Yeah, no, I love that so much, but you should talk about the boat and what the ultimate disposition of that boat was too. Talk about being lucky.
Yeah, the Lusitania, which was like a normal ship that brought people from in that case Liverpool to New York, was eventually sunk by a German U-boat in Ireland, 1915, I believe. So just a couple of years after my grandfather came to America. The famous Lusitania.
So maybe we should have some questions in the remaining few minutes from our guests here, and Kelsey will describe the protocol.
Great. So you can either put a question in the chat if you would like me to ask it of our, we already have one. But the other option is there's at the bottom of the screen a small icon that says raise hand, and you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you if you want to voice your question aloud. But I'd like to start off with Miriam's question. who says her own grandfather's letters from Poland were written in Yiddish. Where can she get them translated? And I don't know, John, if you'd like to talk about the translation process in general.
Yeah. As I said, when I was at Amherst, and it's just, how these things happen. It's just driving. I didn't know. I had no idea. I suppose you can Google stuff, but just seeing the Yiddish bookstore museum in Amherst, Massachusetts, I had to whip off the road and go in and ask them literally, do you translate books that are in Yiddish? And they're like, of course. We have a whole list of people who can do it. Where do you live? I said, Los Angeles. And so my recommendation is go to the Yiddish book, I think it's called Bookstore and Museum, website in Amherst, Massachusetts, and call or send them an email and just say, I have some letters I'd like translated. Can you recommend to me someone who could do the translation? I'm sure they'd be happy to do that, as they were for me.
Other questions, comments? Can I ask one question that may be a little nosy, which is having raised a couple of daughters myself, and while I understand what you're writing about with the family is not necessarily pure nonfiction, I wondered how your children and your beloved wife reacted to that part of your narrative, including the run-up to the bar mitzvah, which I remember myself, as I read this, getting anxious, thinking of my own time being 12 and 13. So how did your family react?
I think very suspect at first. How am I going to be portrayed exactly, and what story are you telling? And I think there were questions from everyone about that, and ultimately, I'd let them read. I'd just say, I've just finished a couple pages. I want to see if this feels good to you, if it feels authentic, and it did to all of them. It felt like who they were, and it felt like the stories that worked for them. It was, and my wife, who was in advertising, she wanted to. She didn't really want to be in this book on a lot of levels. She's very shy, and yet has had such an extraordinary life and career and story of her own parents who were immigrants. And I really wanted to honor them and include them as well, because they're a big part of my life and a big part of my children's lives. So, it's America. My wife's family, her parents were from the Philippines. My wife was born here in California, but they grew up in a different world, in a different culture. And I thought, my children are the product of that. And we see that in America. So many kids, so many people born in biraciality. And it's important to understand how that works with a family. Being raised Jewish, these Jewish raised kids, and we talk about that in the book. And so digging deep into that is tricky, but ultimately they really loved it. And so, I really wanted to share it.
And Dan, here's a chance for you to talk about how proud you are of your brother and close us out for the evening. Don't want to put too much pressure on you, but we have high expectations for this peroration. So go for it.
Thanks, Bert, and thanks to Chevaliers again for hosting us tonight. And John, I'm so proud of the work you've done with this book and bringing our grandfather's story to life and your story. The thing I kept thinking about in reading both stories really is, there's the themes of sort of destiny and fate that pervade both of these stories, and thinking about it myself and how grateful I am to have the family that I do. And I know how grateful you are to have the family that you do, but then seeing all the events that happened and didn't happen, including a meteor strike that conspired to make it possible that we would be here is what is truly sort of, I think, so powerful about this story for me personally, and I think for all of us in the family. So thank you for doing this and your gift.
Thank you. I thank everyone who's here for being a part of this. And, you know, again, to Chevalier, to Bert, to Kelsey, thank you very much for hosting this.
Well, thank you both for doing this. The book Return from Siberia is really worth reading and buying. It is, as I've said, cinematic. It is a compelling story. And all happy families are happy in the same way, we've learned long ago in Russian literature. But it's a joy to read about a happy family over this many generations and looking out to the future and know that the happiness of this family prospectively is assured. So thank you for writing the book. Thank you for being here. Dan, thank you for being a dutiful brother and gently interrogating John. And thank everybody for being here this evening. It really was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.